your lesson can be fantastic on paper, but if you can't manage a classroom, that lesson isn't very valuable.
If our classroom is going to be one that is most effective and most impacting for students, we need to look deeper to understand our role and to understand our students.
If our talk is focused on action, then we might be able to get a whole lot more accomplished within a sentence or a phrase or a paragraph than we ever thought.
We have that opportunity in our Christian schools to disciple our young people. What does the Bible say about some of these things? So that the Spirit can work in their lives.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
Welcome back. I'm excited to have you with us for this week's episode here on the Teacher Edition podcast. I hope you're doing well. May is marching by so quickly, and I trust you're enjoying some fun and some special times with your students, even in the midst of the busyness. It's hard to believe that for so many of you, you really only have a short time left with these students. I trust it will be a time of impact, but also just a special time of memories and doing fun things together. As I mentioned last week, we're going to do something just a little bit different here on the podcast for the month of May. As we wrap up year 3 of the Teacher Edition podcast, we're taking some time to just look back at some of the main themes that we talked about throughout our times together. There are so many themes, but we're just going to focus on 4 of them. In each of these episodes, you're going to hear from a variety of guests who have shared with us on the show. And these, again, are only a sampling of the tremendous guests that we have welcomed to the show. You know, as I was listening back through the episodes, I was just again reminded of what an incredible army of Christian education giants we have. We have been blessed to hear from so many world-class Christian educators who have dedicated their lives to training up young people for the Lord. And they gave up their time to share with us. That's just so special. Last week, we explored the theme of a biblical worldview. That's a topic that really finds itself woven throughout most, if not all, of our episodes. Of course, we only had time to highlight just a few of them, but what a powerful theme that has been just a vital theme. If you didn't catch last week's episode, squeeze that in on your to-do list. It's a must, and I really think you'll find it to be an encouragement. Of course, all of the complete episodes from these episodes that we're featuring or highlighting and many more are available on our website. That's teachereditionpodcast.com. You can also go find us on social media. We are Teacher Edition Podcast on Facebook, and you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Teacher Edition Pod. We're also on YouTube as Teacher Edition Podcast. So this week, we're going to focus on classroom management and student relations. These are obviously vital topics in the life and health of a classroom. We've had the privilege of hearing so many different guests that have just shared ideas, they've shared strategies, all for helping our classrooms run smoothly. Also for connecting with students, mentoring students, for navigating those difficult topics, and just all those things that are pulling on our students today. I don't know about you, but I have found these episodes just to be full of gold. I guess we could say it that way. I feel like I've walked away with just a better understanding and just with so many practical helps for helping the students where they need that support. We all know classroom management is far beyond those sets of rules, the traffic pattern around your room, the furniture layout, and having a quiet classroom. Those are necessary on some level, of course. But if our classroom is going to be one that is most effective and most impacting for students, we need to look deeper to understand our role and to understand our students and how we can best reach students, all while managing a well-run classroom. So let's start with a good view as to what classroom management really is. According to Mark Koster in episode 101, classroom management is not just control. He talks about why classroom management is so important. As we jump into this week's episode and our theme, let's start there.
Talk with us about how you manage student behavior. What have you found to be some of those, I guess, guideposts, maybe we could call them, as you work with students? What do you think?
Yeah, so it's great. I think that the key, what you had said before was so important, was that your lesson can be fantastic on paper, but if you can't manage a classroom, that lesson isn't very valuable. And so being able to manage students is just critical for an effective classroom environment. And I know when I first started education, it was all about like, what's your discipline plan? What's your discipline steps? And yes, that's a part of it, but I'd rather us learn to manage this behavior so that we don't necessarily have to do as much disciplining. And so that management is just so key. And so consistent and clear expectations. I hate surprises. If this wasn't laid out for them ahead of time as the expectation, then it's hard to really discipline or change it. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't later on correct that, because now we're communicating the expectation. But initially, we've got to lay that out. And I do, especially with my junior hires that I taught, I did a lot of modeling early on of here's how we do things so that there's not a surprise. I always enjoy doing kind of an interactive like discussion with me, right? When they were corrected, and how do you respond to that? A third thing that really gets put onto us as teachers is we have to be prepared for class. If your activities are not ready, if your lessons aren't ready, if your copies aren't made, um, I know on the days when I was really on top of things, and I understand there are days when it's just we're just trying to survive as educators in the classroom. But if I was on top of things and I was showing a video, that video was already queued up, ready to hit play. I was at the 2 minute and 12 minute mark, right, or whatever it was, so that I could hit that and be ready. My slideshow was already on my projector, ready to go, and so every single step was done because as educators, we know that
Yeah.
every little
Makes a
gap,
difference. Yeah.
that gap makes a difference, right? And they seize those
Oh,
opportunities.
yes.
So the more that we could fill, and so the fourth kind of principle for me in managing is our thoughtful transitions and procedures. I'm in the position now where I do a lot of observations, and the number one time that behavior is an issue are during transitions, and those are hard to do. A 90-minute block, I want my teachers to do at least 5 different things each class period, which is also part of the management. We'll get there in a minute, but all those transitions are just so important as you move from one activity to the next. And so for myself, it was, all right, class, we finished this activity. Please pass your handout to the front. But I'm still talking during all this time. So as you pass those items to the front, let's just recap again what we talked about real quick. Or what were your 2 takeaways from what we just talked about? And okay, Johnny over there, what's your 1 takeaway? Fantastic. But again, I'm still controlling the conversation, the discussion of the class, not leaving again that wiggle room for students to get off task. And is that exhausting for teachers at times?
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's not as exhausting as trying to get them to quiet down again.
True.
So a fifth one is just moving around. Be active in your classroom. Teachers, I get it. It is so easy to sit. It is enjoyable to sit. Um, my wife is in elementary, but taught fifth and sixth for years, and she always taught from the back of the classroom. She wanted to be back there. I can't say that was me, but I was the guy who was actively wandering up and down aisles. If I see a teacher using PowerPoint without a remote control, I'm going to IT so fast so they can get a remote control,
right.
so they can
Put 'em
actively
on the
move
move.
around that classroom. Yes. And that just
Yeah.
changes the whole energy and vibe of the room by teachers actively moving and being engaged. And so getting to know them on a personal level. It's simple things like going to their events. I was at a basketball game last night, and so today gives me an opportunity to say, "Hey, Johnny, great game last night." And whether they saw me there or not, now me making the comment to them knows that I was there. That creates a conversation point for us. Um, but knowing them, boy, learning their names as fast as possible is just critical for classroom management. Boy, if they see that you are caring about them and remembering things, and boy, and in our environment, boy, how can I be praying for you? Like, what great avenues that we have at our schools to be able to kind of show interest and care and demonstrate that. So
So, in your experience, what would you say are some of the basics of classroom management and then also of discipline?
yeah, yeah. So some of those basic thoughts boy, we've got to call them to a biblical standard to our students. We're not just doing this to make your life miserable. We're not asking you to obey us just to be mean. I had this convo with my daughter recently. I'm not trying to be mean to you. There's a purpose behind it. And let's call them to a biblical standard. Here's what God's word says. Here's what we're calling. Not every one of the items that I mentioned above, right, is a biblical standard, but there is some order and respect involved toward the educator, and there's being a good steward of the abilities and gifts that we've been given. And so let's call them to that standard. So there is kind of the reason. We don't always have to give the reason why, but it's helpful when we can. Also, correction is not negotiable. I don't understand when we negotiate with our students.
Yeah.
It's not negotiable.
It's a common thing these days.
I've had students come up to me after, I tell them, I said, if I correct you in class and you disagree, come after class and say, hey, Mr. Coster, I don't think I was doing what you said I was doing. I'd say, oh, my bad. And we move on. The fact that they came and if they stopped the behavior and came and talked to me about it, there's no consequence. It's just a quick correction. But we're not going to negotiate. If I gave you a 15, 30-minute detention, guess what? We're going to serve a 15 or 30-minute detention.
Following that same foundational theme, Jenny DeYoung shared some foundational thoughts about the importance of a plan. Profound, yes. Something likely we already all know, sure. But sometimes we wander away from those basics. Jenny brings us back there and also challenges and encourages us as we experience frustrations and even in the areas of needed growth in our own management style and plan. Let's listen in.
Let's talk about the importance of a plan. So I know we are into the school year at this point, but no doubt some out there are struggling to get a plan that's a good fit for their classroom, or they feel like they need to regroup and embrace a new plan. And no doubt, there are some teachers out there who don't have a plan. They just take it as it comes day by day. So talk with us about the importance of classroom management plans. Why is it so important to establish a good plan?
Sure. I think it's survival. We know if we've spent any time with children that it truly has to be a calling and a passion to really survive in the classroom. And I think you hit it on the head there when you were asking the question is why is it important? And having that plan, because when you student teach, at least when I started, you go into a classroom and that plan is already started. So then when you jump in, those students are already trained. And then when you start your own classroom, you forget or don't realize how much work it takes. And then I feel like you just kind of struggle till you find your niche or see the true need. It really is crucial to think through those procedures. If not, it becomes chaotic. And we've probably all experienced some classrooms where it felt chaotic just because it wasn't clear what was expected. And even the Bible gives us a good foundation for that. In Proverbs 25:28, it says, a man without self-control is like a broken city and it's left without walls. So we need to help, especially young children and even teenagers, develop that plan. So in the classroom, they can have, like a city, a firm foundation that's protected, and they know that they're feeling comfortable and they know what's expected.
Katie Klipp joined us for a couple different sessions that speak directly into classroom management. Well, so often we're looking for the next tool, the app, the classroom manipulative. All of those, can help up our game in classroom management. But often we overlook one of the most important tools, our talk. How much do we actually take time to think through the words that we use in our classroom? I'm talking about our vocabulary. I'm talking about what we actually say, the words we choose in managing our classroom. Episode 4 was definitely a challenging one as Katie talked with us about our talk as our tool.
Language is a lot like that. We all have the same tool at our disposal, but whether we use it effectively to build up and to strengthen and to clarify, or whether we use it ineffectively, that's really the difference that we're talking about here with teacher language. So I think it's important really as we start out here talking about teacher language that I guess this is one of the biggest steps for us as teachers is to take a step back from what we are saying and how we talk, and to listen from an outsider's perspective. And that takes a really strong person to be able to do that. I'm the first one to say, it's hard to change something that you've done for many, many years. I remember my mom used to say when my sister and I were cleaning our room, or even when we were getting a house ready to sell, she would always use the phrase, come in as a buyer. And so we would say, well, the house looks great. I think it's ready to sell. And then she would say, well, we need to come in as a buyer. We need to come in the front door and look around as if we weren't connected to the situation at all, and view that situation from like taking our hands off of it. And we really need to do that as teachers. When we think about our language, we need to be big enough of a person to view what we say from an outsider's ear and be strong enough to see that we might have some things to change in this area of language. And a few years ago, when I started doing a lot of reading on this topic and really studying and praying about it too, and seeing how I need to change things in my own classroom and seeking to make changes, it was a hard thing to do, but I had to be willing to step back and say, I may not be doing that right. And we all have to do that. That's something we all have to be willing to do as teachers, because language is such a valuable tool. We know that it can build up or destroy. I mean, don't we see that in social media? Just in 1 minute, in one sentence, someone's reputation can be marred, or someone can be torn down or built up and strengthened. And we know that language is valuable because it can give understanding, or it can clarify if it's specific enough. And we're going to talk about that later. We know that it can also provide a strong model to follow, or one not to follow. And in our day and age, I feel like as teachers, our role as a model is becoming more and more important. Students may not have as much connection with their parents, who may be very busy on social media, or maybe they have a home where there's not as much connection with the parents, whether work schedules or whatever it is. They are needing that strong model to follow in the area of language and how to communicate. And I know my first grade parents would say often, even this year, it would make me nervous when they would say, oh, well, my child comes home and they play school all night and they sound just like you. And I think I'm supposed to be smiling when they say that, but that really scares me to death, because whatever I say, they're going to be imitating, whether it's a good role model or not. And students really need that strong model to follow in the area of talking, communicating, in the area of language in general. There are different ways we use talk in the classroom. And if we kind of focus in and realize those 3 different categories, we might be able to use them more effectively. So I guess we could say safely throughout the day that our language could kind of be divided into 3 different kinds of talk. One would be reinforcing, one would be redirecting, and one would be reminding. And all of these 3 kinds we'll talk about here in a second, but I guess we could say that all of them should be focused around one word, and that would be the word action. Often as teachers, we just talk, not really paying attention to what our talk is doing or asking or clarifying. We just talk, and we hope that it's accomplishing its goal. Right. But if our talk is focused on action, then we might be able to get a whole lot more accomplished within a sentence or a phrase or a paragraph than we ever thought. And we talk a lot. And I like to step back and ask myself, I think this was a phrase from one of the books that I read, but it said, how did what I just said help that student clarify, understand something, or grow? And if I can't answer that question and really figure out a way that it helped my student understand, clarify, or grow, maybe I should have rephrased it, or maybe I should have just left it out altogether. There's a lot of talk that teachers do that could just be left out, because it really doesn't help help a student understand, clarify, or grow.
Katie returned for episodes 92 and 93 to unpack strategies for better understanding and coming alongside some of those most challenging behaviors as we manage our classrooms, from teasers to tattlers, from the clowns to the defiant. Katie kind of pulled back that curtain and helped us understand what is driving that behavior. What are they thinking? What's going on with those students? And really gave us some insights on how to help address the behavior instead of fueling it. Here are a few highlights from those episodes.
Let's pull up to the 30,000 foot view. Are there any general points to consider
As we get ready for this cliff dive into this topic, I guess I'm wondering, are there any overarching suggestions? Are there any elements in mind that we could keep in mind that just kind of apply to all these different types of students or behaviors we're going to look at?
Yes, I think we could say safely that there are. Let's zoom out and get that big picture that you're saying. When dealing with these types of students, it's easy to not see the big picture. It's easy to get down in the weeds and think that there isn't anything in common between these students and even in common between these students and us as teachers. So I guess we could say some points to consider as we start here. Number one, our natural bent is sinful, and so is theirs. And
True.
sometimes that problem that you see in your classroom has nothing to do with you. Actually, all the time, it goes back to the same problem, which is a heart problem. And we have that same sinful bent that they do, but I think sometimes we get down in the weeds and have these struggles with these students, and we forget that. Something else I would guess would be something we could say in response to dealing with all of these types of students that we're going to talk about today is think of the word proactive and not reactive. That's something that I've kind of taken as my mantra in my classroom in kind of a theme. And that is totally opposite of our society today. Isn't social media just full of reactions and knee-jerk reactions and whatever you think you get to say type thing? But with these students, if we are proactive, there will be less need for any kind of remedy or anything in the future. And even just the general thought of building an environment of responsibility and care goes along with being proactive. That's something that I've taken on after reading and studying for several years on this topic. The students need that. They need a response, a place where they can feel cared for and where other people in the class care for them, their teacher cares for them, where they have responsibilities and they feel needed. And that also helps bring down some of the level of problems and the need for us to solve problems when those students are feeling cared for and they feel like they're part of the team. And I guess I could say, too, as we begin, two really great resources that I used when I was studying this. One of the books is called The Power of Our Words, and it's by Paula Denton. And another one is Teasing, Tattling, Defiance, and More. It's written by Margaret Berry Wilson. Both of these books are secular authors, but they have amazing principles to use and things to try, ways to word things. And that's where we feel like so often we fall short is how do you say it? How do you word it? And these both are put out by Responsive Classroom, which also has some amazing articles and other resources that go along with what we're going to talk about today. Love the people that God gives you. You pray for your class all summer, and then when they're put on the list, you get all excited. And then what happens to that when you realize that you got some tricky ones in the classroom? Love the people that God has given you. Make yourself a set of beats. Remember those 5 words. Lord, help me love them. And really try to find something to love in every child. Not to make you a great teacher, not so you can report that you've done it, but because they were made in God's image. And no matter how trying they are to have in your class, they were made in God's image. They deserve to be loved. And God has put you in their life to make a difference for this year. That's your responsibility, but it's also a privilege.
Well, we can often get wrapped up in the policies and procedures and working through misbehaviors. How often do we take time for intentional discipleship? In episode 66, Brad Parker walks us through the importance of keeping discipleship at the core of our interactions with our students. He provides the why and the what. And here are just a few of his thoughts about creating those discipleship opportunities.
Talking about the home, God's word is very clear that the primary responsibility for training children is the parents. That's where it lies. And we, as Christian school teachers and administrators, we're partnering with the parents. We're not the parents. Christian schools are also not the church. And it's really important that they don't see themselves in that role. Instead, the Christian school and the church are powerful tools for partnering with parents in the training of their children. And each, this, and I'm sure our listeners know this, each has its own opportunities, each has its unique input. But all that being said, there is a common thread, and that's the vital need for discipleship. Brad, I know this is a burden that you have and something that you have really worked to put into action. What do you see as steps that a school could implement to create gospel-centered discipleship or programs, even for staff and students? What do you think?
Yes, I think it's really important for schools, first of all, to recognize, the gospel is necessary for salvation. And
Yeah.
no matter if you have primarily a discipleship school or you primarily have an evangelistic school, obviously the evangelistic schools are going to focus more on sharing the gospel salvation message more often. But even if you're in a discipleship school, it's really important that you do include the gospel in Bible lessons, in chapels, in conversations with parents that you have in meetings before school. And again, we're not the church and we're not necessarily preaching at them, but we need to allow the Spirit to work in the lives of our students. And so I don't want to discount just the importance of sharing the gospel for salvation. And by God's grace, we have schools that do have students that are saved, and I trust that there are believers, in our Christian schools. And we have to also then remind ourselves that the gospel is not just for salvation, but the gospel is also for just daily living. Sometimes we focus so much on the gospel as just a way to heaven, a way to salvation. But the Bible is God's word that gives us daily instruction on how to live our lives. And I'm often reminding them that we need to constantly go back to God's word. And so as teachers interact with students, and whether it be a more formal opportunity, like a student does something, so you have to address it, or whether it be just a casual conversation, just bringing God's word back to bear in their life and just reminding them of what God's word says about respect to authority, or the importance of honesty and telling the truth, or the importance of being honest on a paper by, not cheating, not borrowing answers. Because what we're finding is that a lot of our students have no reference even to what truth is. And the culture has bombarded them so much that truth has become so relative. And so if we're not bringing the gospel truth to bear in their lives in just everyday living, then they're not hearing it many times, or as frequently, maybe at home. And so that's just a great opportunity. And I'm often also reminded, as Jesus ministered and discipled, he did it in the context of relationships. He built relationships with his disciples. It wasn't just, teaching them and then walking away. He would interact with them and he would teach them lessons as they walked along the way, or as they were out in the field, or as they were in a boat, or whatever it may be. And so just trying to bring that example into the classroom, that, we're living life with these students. For that young person, their life, their job, quote unquote, is being a student. And so we have the opportunity to live life with them. And so and I would just challenge administrators and teachers in that regard. And it's not easy. But one area that I found helpful is just opening up to students and sharing even some of our own weaknesses, some of the things that we struggle with, and to show our students that we're human, we're sinful, but we need to go back to what the Bible says, allow the gospel to inform our living. Of course, we need it for salvation, but we need it for that daily living. And there's so many opportunities during the day to bring that into the classroom.
Taking responsibility seems to be a lost art these days. We find our students, maybe even ourselves at times, wanting to pass off responsibility instead of just accepting it. We have actually had 2 episodes focused on the area of teaching students responsibility. Let's join Pastor Tim Berlin from episode 121 and then Leedy Wallace from episode 38 as they highlight the need to intentionally teach responsibility in our classrooms.
Well, I think it's important for every one of us to understand that God has designed things specifically. From everything in creation to every role, there is a defined purpose. And inside of that purpose are defined roles that have responsibilities. And personal responsibility it starts with an understanding of what is it that God designed, and what is my role within that design, and then what does it mean to personally own every decision that I make inside of that role. And so personal responsibility really starts with God and what He designed and how it functions, and then what is my part to play, and I own the responsibility for it. Unfortunately, today, we live in a society of blame. It goes two ways. Either we want to blame somebody or we want to play the victim. Neither one of these is taking responsibility for my decisions. I would tell my boys growing up, you don't get to make anybody else's decisions, but you make all of yours.
True.
And so their decisions do not make you make your decision.
Right.
You decide what decision you're going to make. I would tell them nobody can make you mad. They can offend you, they can wrong you, they can do a lot of things to you, but how you respond is your decision.
Right. Yeah.
So that's
true.
really what personal responsibility is.
What do we do about it? So I've talked to many parents and teachers and students struggling with responsibility. There's often a loss in what to do. We live in a culture, society, we want a quick fix. Like, how do we take care of this? Is there a secret formula? What can we do? What are your thoughts? So we're working with students, families. How do we teach personal responsibility? Where do we even start?
Yeah, I think it starts with embracing that God has a specific design that fulfills a very specific purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then teaching, well, then what part am I responsible for with inside of that design? So as a husband, a God designed marriage. My wife has very defined role and responsibilities inside of the marriage, and so do I.
Right.
I counsel husbands and wives who are having trouble, and many times they're trying to fix the other person. And I oftentimes will tell them, you don't get to fix them. You can only fix you. And they're going to have to address them. And it seems easier to justify, well, I would if they.
Sure.
No,
yeah,
you
get the
still
focus
could.
off me.
Yeah. And so I think it starts with teaching defined roles inside of that responsibility, and that how those responsibilities fulfill the role. And so if you have a parent-child, they both have God-given defined roles, and inside of that, they have to own the responsibility that is theirs. The teacher-student have defined roles, the employer-employee, right?
That's excellent. Excellent overview. Okay, so let's get really specific on this. Take it right into the classroom. Could you give us some examples of jobs, or, as we would call them in the classroom, or maybe they'd be chores at home, that could help students develop personal responsibility? It's something we wish you could just bottle and, buy and hand out and one sip and it's all taken care of. What are some ways we can start developing that in students?
I don't remember who said it, but it's a well-known quote. The greatest ability is dependability, right? Is
Right.
teaching them to be dependable. I think that our culture is begging for children to learn to do their best, that it's expected, that it's unacceptable to do just enough to get by,
Mm-hmm.
to just give it eye service. In other words, when the teacher's looking, then I work hard, or when my parents, but other than that, I'm just going to try to get away with.
Right.
It's rooted in a lack of character,
Mhm.
right? And so I would tell our teachers, listen, if the work turned in is sloppy, give it back.
Right.
Tell them to do it again. Now that just drives parents crazy, because they say, why in this culture, in this society, do you expect kids to write neat? They're not going to write. They have tablets, they have phones. They're going to, put it all on a screen. So it's not about writing.
Right.
It's about
Correct.
character.
Mm-hmm.
You see, they miss it. You're trying to help them to teach their kid that he can do his best. It's not about the writing. You're using the opportunity for them to write neatly and to do things well as a
Exactly.
platform to do something much deeper and much broader. And yet they want to do battle on a level that undermines what you're trying to teach, that would establish them being personally responsible. In other words, there's one person who's responsible to do this work and to do it neatly. And so you can't blame anybody else. You are the one who is responsible, and you're the one handing it in.
Right.
The other thing is about doing it on time.
Oh, yes.
We live in this world where there is this self-absorption that everyone can wait on me. That, I was
about
busy.
me.
Yeah. And what we're missing is the way the relationships work is you defer. You show deference and you show respect to the people you're meeting when you are there, when you said you would be there. When the teacher said this assignment is due on this date, you show deference to God's design. They have the right to tell you when it's
Sure.
due. And then your job is to show respect to God's design when you fulfill the assignment on time. And so the other thing is learning to follow instructions. Do everything that was expected. Sometimes we teachers, parents, leaders of all sort get frustrated, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, it's good enough," because
Right.
it's not worth the battle
Yep.
to make them do it right.
So
Well, all
true.
we did was further teaching them they don't have to be personally responsible.
We empowered them
And
to do it
so
again.
I think that we have to get back, and people who say, "Oh, you're just being so strict." Well, yes, you're strict when they're young because you're developing their character. And you're telling them, no, you don't get to blame anybody else because this is your job. There's huge ramifications. You can
Absolutely.
dismiss it. You can dismiss it saying, "Oh, Pastor Berlin, you're just old-fashioned and you're too strict." Well, no, these are foundational to how God designed things. And we're building them at a young age to understand all
sure.
of life is going to work this way. And when we don't require it to work that way, we set them up for failure.
Share with us why teaching responsibility to your students is so very important.
I can speak for my experience, and I've been in this journey called academics for some time, since 2005. And more, I've seen the lack of responsibility, especially in the lives of young people. There's the blame game. Well, I didn't get the homework done because I was never reminded. I didn't get the homework done because I was tired. I didn't get the homework done because I didn't have a pencil at home. I didn't get the homework done because I had to babysit my brothers and sisters. I didn't get the homework done because I went to bed too early and forgot about it. I had other things to worry about. The more and more I saw that, I say, you know what, Lord, is there something that we can do as school administrators to be able to help these young students or young minds to cultivate responsibility? I really enjoy working with young people, and young people, they can only go as far as you guide them. If you're not coaching or teaching them responsibility, they will grow up believing that there is no sense of responsibility that needs to be done on my behalf. So responsibility is given to every human being of some sort or another. Obviously, God has given us, as I alluded to, even at the beginning with the Garden of Eden, God told Adam, here's what I want you to do. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 and 17. You are to do this. I've given you everything else except for that tree. Now, here's where you have to be responsible. From the beginning, all the way from the beginning, God gave Adam the responsibility of work, responsibility of obedience. God gave him different assignments, commands. I want you to be accountable for this. I want you to be responsible for this because this is what I'm trusting you to do, Adam. I believe as we teach our children responsibility, we are looking at the bigger picture. As I alluded to before, to whom much is given, much is required. The passage that comes to mind is Mark chapter 25. When the servant was leaving, I'm paraphrasing here, to go out of town, and he told his servants, hey, listen, I'm going to a far country. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this. And you guys take care of these things. And then every individual was given an assignment per se to take care of what was given or left behind for them. Well, some multiplied, but there was one man who didn't really know what to do. Well, I know you an angry man. I know you this sort of man. I wasn't certain what to do. Well, the boss, as we say it here, was not pleased with that, with that response. You know, one day we're going to stand before Jesus. There won't be any excuses. You see, God has given us so much. We as adults, we as school administrators, we have to nurture these kids as far as how to cultivate responsibility. There is nothing that thrills me when a child or a former student returns to the school and say, you know what, I thank you all for pressing responsibility in us. Nothing. Obviously, God has called us to minister to these boys and girls, and the bigger picture is to the glory of God. Just like I desire to train my children responsibilities in life, it ought to be the same thing with my students. Because ultimately, I want them to succeed and go on and serve Jesus. So therefore, I am going to instill everything I need in the lives of those children, lives of those students. And obviously, it begins with responsibility. Because we live in a time where responsibility is really not paramount at all. It's a minor thing. We play the blame game. Well, somebody else has to do it. It's somebody else's fault. It wasn't my place to step there and do this or do that. Oh, no. To whom much is given, much is required. I love in the book of Proverbs, how long will you lie down, ye sluggard? When will you get out from your sleep? And it goes on, and it talks about it. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, the rest. And poverty will come on like a thief and scarcely like an armed man. Proverbs 6, verse 9 through 11. And when responsibility is not there, Jenny, lives are being destroyed.
As students enter our classrooms, they bring with them more than their books and their backpacks. More and more students are carrying heavy weights, weights of worry, of fear, of depression, anger, home situations, even loss. Well, we need to be equipped to teach our subjects. We need to be equipped and ready to also support and speak into the lives of the students as they face these things in their daily lives. Dr. Bruce Meyer has joined us for several different episodes over the past 3 years. Each of his episodes has unpacked one of those elements, giving us better insights as to what the students are facing, but also how we can come alongside them while trying to manage our classroom and mentoring other students as well. Now, just recently, we aired an episode where we talked about supporting students who are dealing with depression. Today, let's take a few minutes to listen in as Bruce talked with us first about fear in the lives of our students, and then about the topic of anger.
So, as I mentioned right from the start of the podcast, students are bringing fear to the table, to the classroom more and more. Even as a teacher and as a principal, I remember just seeing over and over there are more and more behaviors that were very closely even just with a little bit of digging, they were identified as stemming from some type of fear in that child. As a child, I never remember hearing about something called panic attacks, but now they just seem to be so commonplace. Bruce, in your experience, what are you seeing? What's contributing to that rise? Do you see society as contributing to that fear that we're seeing this in young people so much more?
There are probably a lot of factors involved in this, Jenny, but certainly the news media, the world affairs, and the quick access to information is contributing to a lot of those fears. I have followed over the years asking students, what are they fearful of? And I have seen even with Student Life Office, they tell me there are more and more of those panic attacks, more and more anxiety, more and more fear. And even with the COVID crisis, that certainly exacerbated the problem of fear and anxiety in so many. And I think in part because they were isolated through that experience as well. And so fear is on the rise. Panic attacks are something that are relatively new, probably within the last 15 to 20 years, I would say, in my experience, is when I've seen them rising. And prior to that time, we had never heard of it. If I'd asked somebody a panic attack, they would have said, "What do you mean by that?" And so we do need to talk about what is that and how do we handle those panic attacks, because chances are now your audience, your teachers have probably a handful of students, depending upon the size of their class, that will have symptoms of panic attacks. And they're frightening to us because we're not sure what to do with those.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do want to dig into that more. I love that you pointed out just the constant deluge of news. Even as adults, how many times do we hear somebody say, I just can't watch the news? I just have to walk away, because it is so much, and it just weighs on your mind, that constant tsunami of information. Even students with constantly on phones and connected and all that I love how you pointed that, because that is so true. That is on the rise, and it's amazing how many other things are on the rise because of that. Okay, so let's go back to
one author, if I could.
Absolutely.
One author said that all of the electronics that we have in the internet gives us the sense of omniscience, but we lack the omnipotence to deal with all those problems. So we're very much aware of the problems, but we can do nothing about them.
Let's just go on this panic attack line just a little bit further. So the reality is that physically there is a lot going on there, and potentially there's a lot at stake. So talk with us about addressing the physical issues of panic attacks and how we should approach that. You mentioned it a little bit with the breathing and the ball. Is there anything else you can add to that? Because in a classroom, when a student's having a panic attack or we're heading into that, what are some practical things that teachers can do?
Sometimes doctors will say if you can just establish kind of a normal walking. So it might be that you take the student out in the hallway, and let's just hand in hand, maybe, if that's appropriate, but we just walk down the hallway and check out what's going on down here and come back, and that restores normal breathing. The harder the person resists the feelings, the worse they get. And this is why the loop that I mentioned to you. So if it's, I'm doing this and I'm saying, okay, don't panic, don't panic. All I'm doing is feeding that fear even more.
Right.
Instead, I need to really shift my focus away. So moving to some spiritual truths, the two truths that bring the most comfort to my heart and many others is the fact that I will never leave you nor forsake you. So Jesus is with us, and he is interceding for us, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. So he's praying for me. So I've got those assurances, and whatever the trigger is right now, so let's say I am supposed to perform a solo, a recital, or I'm supposed to give a speech. Well, okay, this is temporary. In 5 minutes, whatever the speech is, this is over, but focus on your message that you're supposed to deliver through this speech. So you want them to be focusing on truth. That's what I focus on. But let's try to restore that body stability first, and then we'll focus on those truths. Typically, that's what I do, the approach I take.
So I know I have heard it said many times, fear is a choice. We've seen students, or maybe we've experienced ourselves, where we choose fear and we choose fear and we choose fear, and it just grows and festers. How do habits play into fear, or on both sides of the coin, both increasing our fears and maybe those same habits helping to diminish fears? What do you think?
What I have found is students who run from fear, so they're giving into the fear. So let's say I'm supposed to give a speech, and what I've learned now is if I don't give the speech, I'll be sick that day, I'll find some way out of the speech. It alleviates the fear. Yes, temporarily it does, but the next time you have to give a speech, your fear is going to be even bigger. So you have to face those fears with the trust of God. And if I'm feeding the fears, it's like feeding a lion who's ravenous and hungry. The more I feed him, the more ravenous and hungry he becomes. And when I run out of steaks, I'm now his next target. So fear doesn't work that way. If I'm going to defeat it, I have to face it head on. And again, that doesn't mean you have to do things that you aren't commanded to do, like climbing ladders or what have you. But if you are responsible to give a speech, then give the speech. And we work through that fear. And what you learn through that is, wow, I gave that speech. Maybe it wasn't an A speech, maybe it was a C. But now my fears are going to diminish because I face those head on. The habit, though, is to run from that, give in to that. And this is what you see with OCD, folks. So my fear is I've got germs, so I'm going to wash my hands. And it goes from every 10 minutes to every 7 minutes to every 5 minutes to every 4 minutes. And so they can't function now because they're so busy washing their hands. When you can reverse that cycle, they start to see that even though I haven't washed my hands now for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I haven't fallen over dead yet, or I haven't contracted some dreaded disease or what have you. So they really have to learn to fight those fears in a biblical way with truth. And one of the passages that I love on that is Philippians 4. And so if we have time to talk about that, we'll come back to that if time permits. But it's a wonderful text that gives us very specific truths on how to handle fear.
So, Bruce, how would you define anger?
Well, I think God gave us the anger emotion to help us defend ourselves in a time of crisis. So either we fight or we flee. And we might, especially in a sinful, broken world, we might need that.
Sure.
And it's becoming more and more apparent that that is a real problem in our culture. So I think it is God-given, but the problem is, like every other emotion that we have, when sin enters the picture, it can go the wrong direction and become destructive, violent, or misguided, very selfish and prideful in how I approach even that emotion.
So we know that our students are influenced so heavily by the culture, the society around them, the mindset, the jargon, the attitudes, even the justification for behavior. Where do you see anger in that? How have contemporary models of anger influenced believers, in your opinion?
Well, in several ways, and probably too many to discuss in this short time. But one of the theories that governs what our world is doing with anger is what I could call the pressure cooker model, or what some would call the hydraulic model. And that is, anger is building up in us. And if we don't release that slowly, then we'll just explode. And you see this with the riots, where police just stand by and let rioters burn buildings and loot because we've got to let them blow off steam. That is completely an unbiblical approach. Another way that some would deal with this is say, let's just put a lid on it and squelch it. But then I'm not really dealing with this in a biblical way. And Ephesians 4 would direct us towards, I am taking this anger that is troubling me and I'm replacing it with forgiveness and love and tenderheartedness, compassion, etc. So I'm actually doing something active rather than trying to suppress it or just slowly release it or vent it. That's another model. As we go to a rage room and we throw things, we sling paint, that really doesn't solve the heart issue that's going on, and it certainly doesn't address injustice if injustice is actually occurring.
Okay, so in sorting through all that we've talked about, the path our discussion has taken today, would you say that anger is a root cause or a symptom of a greater heart issue?
I think it's always a symptom. We like to view it as this is a cause that I have to deal with. But when we talk counseling, we always talk root and fruit. And anger is always a fruit issue. Something's going on inside here that I've got to get to that root issue, because that's what's driving then the fruit that is displaying itself. So whether it's a temper tantrum or the silent treatment, that's another way of dealing with anger. Yeah. Whatever the manifestation of that is, I'm not dealing with that biblically. I'm not confronting the problem biblically. I'm not solving it. I'm either destroying myself. If I'm shutting down, I'm the silent treatment. I'm seething over that. I'm becoming bitter and resentful, or I'm destroying somebody else. And those are the sinful responses to anger. So if I can deal with the heart issues, that's going to help me deal with the fruit, because I use the weed example. If you've got weeds in your yard, just pulling off the top of those doesn't change that weed problem. I've got to kill those roots. And if I don't, those weeds are just going to come back, and they come back stronger and bigger because you've taken off the top.
Right. Okay, so of course, this is a podcast for teachers. So we are always focused on bringing this into the classroom, giving as much practical help as we can on each show. We know that in disciplining, there is that fine line of dealing with the behavior in the classroom. We want to find the balance of when a behavior just needs to be addressed and we need to move on, or when we really need to dig in a bit more and address a heart issue behind that behavior. So Bruce, what are your thoughts on that? How can teachers move beyond just addressing the behavior to actually dealing with the issues of the heart
with students?
Certainly, there are times when just correcting a behavior in a classroom setting is
Sure.
appropriate, and I don't need to go into a lot of detail with that. But if the problem is chronic, if it's reoccurring with a student, so here's a student that is just constantly angry, losing temper, then it's time to have a chat. And probably what I would do, I'm not sure how I would handle this in an elementary setting because I've not taught at that level in a very long time. But if I could just sit down over a Coke and just talk with that student, what's going on in your life? Because you may find out that there's a lot of things happening at home, not to blame the home, but there's context if there's chronic anger that would provide some help for me to understand that child's heart. And I might discover that it's not just an anger issue that's going on. There's trouble at home, either with the parents, maybe there's a chronic illness or a terminal illness, and the child is confused and uncertain about the future. So I can minister in a whole lot more ways than just let's deal with this anger issue and control that. That's certainly one of those yellow flags, maybe a red flag that says something's going on that is affecting this child way beyond just what we're seeing with our eyes. So it gives me the chance then to dig in deeper. It might be cause for a parent-teacher conference. Might be cause just for the principal to step in and let's chat with this child. And I don't want to terrify this child, this student, but I do want him to know that I care as a principal, and let's talk about what's going on in your heart when this comes up.
Yeah. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with some encouragement from Randy Paget. In episode 129, Randy discusses having the heart of a teacher. We have said so many times on this podcast that teaching is a high calling, but it is not for the faint of heart. Managing a classroom and meeting the needs of students can be so rewarding, but boy, it can also be challenging and daunting and just really downright discouraging at times. So as we close today, I just want to leave you with some encouragement as Randy shares what makes a great teacher, a teacher that leaves a lasting impact. And he also encourages us when sometimes we just feel like we are burning out trying to manage the demands of a classroom. Let's listen in. Talk to us about what you think, in your experience, makes a great teacher.
Wow. I had some great teachers in the past. I went through, when you asked me to do this episode, I went through just in my mind and I started writing down teachers that I had, their names. And it was amazing that I could remember certain things about them, but almost nothing had to do with the academics that I remembered.
Interesting.
Almost all of it had to do with their interest in us as students. My second grade teacher, I wanted to go home with her. And my mom said, "You can't do that." And I said, "But she wants to take the whole class." And she said, "But you can't do that." I just, teacher after teacher, you also have the other teachers that you don't really remember. And I know that's not why we teach, but that should end up being a benefit
Sure.
of what
part of the impact,
why we
yeah.
teach. So, but to have a love for teaching, first of all, you have to want to teach. I remember I started teaching technically before my bachelor's degree was finished, and enjoyed what I was doing. I just loved being able to share with the kids the knowledge that I had, but also I learned from them, looking at, not just the subject that I was teaching, but seeing the light bulb come on, seeing the students understand something for the first time, which is probably why I ended up teaching math the most of my teaching career. It takes love for the job. It takes a good curriculum to use. It takes knowing that curriculum and how to use it. But if you don't have love for them, and I had a former principal tell me, they will care how much you know when they know how much you care.
That's right.
And it just takes spending time. It's almost what makes a good parent. A good parent is spending time with their kids. A good teacher
Right.
is spending time getting to know your kids.
That's great. You know, when you said you have to want to teach, it reminded me, I've heard several people say, I didn't know what else to do, so I thought I would just teach. As if that is like, plan Z in everything I wanted to do. But now I guess I'll just teach because anybody can do that. And I always think, no. You have to really want to teach. You have to be called to it. It is a calling. It's not just something you do as a backup plan. There are educators walking away from education every day. It's hard. It's hard to be an educator. Randy, what are your thoughts and experiences with that? What do you do when you feel like you have lost your love for teaching? Or maybe the students you have are really hard to love, or you just feel like you're burning out with education. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, those are loaded questions. One thing that another principal of mine used to say to me is, you can quit every Friday, but you have to be back on Monday.
Well said.
And sometimes that means when you walk away, you have to walk away. You have to take that time to recover. There's, I hate using the phrase me time because of what some people mean with that.
Sure.
But you do have to take time to stop and refresh yourself. That's one reason why we have to stay in Scripture. We have to keep ourselves motivated to live for God. And we do that sometimes because we get to the place where we're like, okay, God, what are you doing here? I don't get this. I don't understand what's going on. And we've all had those times, or we will have those times when we think, okay, I've blown it. I can't do this anymore. I don't know how to fix this. And sometimes it's just because you need to take that time with God and say, okay, God, I need you to help me fix this. When you work to love something and then you love what you do, although those downtimes come when you have to stop and get away, you get right back to the, okay, I need to get up and do what I need to do. And loving your job is a big part of it with teaching. I know there's teachers walking away from it, and that kind of breaks my heart, because I think it's because they've lost the passion.
I agree.
When you lose the passion for teaching, when you lose that love for teaching, it's easy to give up.
Right.
So you've just got to, and sometimes it's nothing more, especially for Christian educators, we just need to get back to the Word of God, because sometimes
Very
it's
true.
a revival that we need in our own heart to make us where we should be. Told students for years, my best days are the days that I spend time with God first.
Absolutely.
And that also means my worst days are the days that I think I can make it without Him. And He reminds me often when those days happen, no, you can't make it without me, Randy. Come on, you need me too. And God doesn't need us. We need Him. And when He's the center of our lives, He helps whatever we do to be something that we can be passionate about, we can love to do.
I hope these highlights have been a blessing and a challenge for you. Don't forget that each of these full-length episodes is available on our website, teachereditionpodcast.com. I hope you'll take time to just go back and listen to any that maybe caught your attention today or that you may have missed. I trust you'll plan to join us next week as we reflect back on another theme from the tremendous episodes here on the Teacher Edition podcast over the past 3 years. You won't want to miss out. But for now, it's time to get back to your day. It's not just any day. Every day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Now, go do what God has called you to do.